Hello, this is Web Lecture 2.5. We're going to continue talking about the Constitution today. So far we've talked about the way the three branches of government create a system of checks and balances, and now we're going to look at the legislative branch because we've already talked about the executive branch and the different jobs that the president has. So now we're going to look at the branch of government that combined makes up what's called the Congress. Now, when we talk about the Congress, we're talking about the system that we have, which is a bicameral legislature. And no doubt you understand that the term bi here, term right here means two, and cameral right here, this means branches. So this is two branches or two bodies of a legislature. And a legislature makes up a group of individuals, and in our case, our bicameral legislature is made up of two houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Now the Senate has 2 members per state, and since we have 50 states, that means we have 100 representatives. And the House of Representatives has what's called proportional representation. And proportional representation means that each state is allotted representatives based on how many people they have in their state. So a state like Texas, which has a very large population, I think has about 37 representatives, whereas North Carolina, we have a much smaller population, we have 13 representatives. So that way, as was decided by the Great Compromise, we have the Senate, who has 2 members, and we have the House of Representatives, who has that proportional representation. And so now our representation is relatively fair that way. Now the terms of office for each of these houses of Congress, the Senate serves a 6-year term, so every 6 years those senators are elected, and the House of Representatives serves a 2-year term. Now originally when created, the House of Representatives was more the House of the People, and they were actually elected by the individuals in the United States, whereas originally when it was created, the Senate was elected by the state legislatures. Then that was a constitutional amendment was added, and that was changed, and now both of them are elected by the people. The size of each, as I said before, the Senate has 100 members, and the House of Representatives has 435 members, totaling 535 members or representatives of the United States. Now, there are leaders in both the House and the Senate, and the leaders are the ones that kind of move forward the legislation or the process of the bill to laws. And there are 2 different parties. Obviously we are familiar with the 2 parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, and there's the majority party and then there's the minority party. Now the majority party is the party that has more than half of the members of the House and the Senate, and they belong to that majority party. Now, right now, that's mixed. In the Senate, the Democrats are in the majority, whereas in the House of Representatives, the Republicans are in the majority. And so when you're in the majority party, you get to guide the debate, you get to appoint the leaders of your House, and so this really gives that party a lot of influence to create and pass laws. Whereas if you're in the minority party, that means you have less than half of the members of either the House of Representatives or the Senate. Now, the minority party in the House of Representatives now is the Democrats, and the minority party in the Senate now is the Republicans. And as the minority party, basically what you are there to do is to make sure that there is debate on each of the issues, that the majority party cannot just push through whatever ideas that it wants, that there is some sort of a check on that. So that includes encourages that similar checks and balances that we have between the 3 branches, between the majority and the minority parties. And within the majority party and the minority party, there are people that are called party whips, and they're people that go around and they work for both the majority and the minority party, and they're there to sort of whip up support. So if a bill needs to be passed or they want a bill to be passed, then the party whips go around and they talk to everybody in the majority party or the minority party to get them to all vote the same way, because that's really how legislation happens, is if a big enough group of people all vote for the same outcome. And so those party whips are there to get that support. Now, in the House of Representatives, the official leader is what is known as the Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House is always the ranking majority party member. Now, the Speaker of the House has to be part of the majority party. And when I say ranking, I mean usually somebody that has been there for a long time, somebody that has a lot of power, and it's usually somebody from a fairly large state. This is the person that steers the legislation, and they're the ones that lead the debate on the floor of the House. They can help to make the rules and decide what items are up for debate when, and they recognize people on the floor to speak in the House of Representatives. For the Senate, the leader is the President pro tem or the President pro tempore. Now, technically, the leader of the Senate is the Vice President. The Vice President of the United States is technically the leader of the Senate, but the Vice President often has other things to do. Honestly, I'm not sure what exactly, because really the Vice President, that seems pretty much like the best job to have in the world, because you're not the president, but you don't have to, so you don't have all those responsibilities, but you still get to hang out with the president, so that's pretty cool. But whatever the Vice President is doing, typically he is not leading the Senate. So the President pro tem does that, and this is usually, again, somebody that is one of the most senior members of the majority party, and this person has the same duties as the Speaker. They lead the debate, they decide who gets to speak, they recognize those speakers, and this is a very important job as well. Now, when it comes to the legislative process, there are different committees, because imagine you have 435 people in the House of Representatives. If you want to discuss a bill and try to debate it and figure out what's good about it and what's bad about it, there's no way that you can do that with all 435 members of the House of Representatives. So what they do is they create committees, and these are groups that have specific tasks. They have specific topics, and this is where a lot of the work in the House of Representatives and even the Senate gets done, because they're smaller groups, they're able to meet just about specific topics, and they can work out a lot of the kinks of a bill before it is introduced to the entire House of Representatives. Now, a lot of bills don't even get out of the committees because they're not worth it. They're not good enough to even introduce to the full House floor or the full Senate floor. And so there are different types of committees. One of those types of committees is what's called a standing committee. And a standing committee is a permanent committee. So every time the Congress meets, this committee exists. So one of those committees is like the Armed Services Committee. Now, obviously, they deal with the military, and so they have to, figure out what to do for the military. Now, there's also what's called the Budget Committee, and that's another standing committee, and they deal with establishing and setting the money that the government is going to spend each year. And there are other committees. One of the most important committees in the House of Representatives is what's called the House Rules Committee. And the House Rules Committee, they're the ones that get to determine what bills are debated, how long they're debated for, and they set those rules because the House of Representatives, with so many different people, they have to establish very specific rules. Now, another type of committee is what's called a joint committee or a conference committee. And these are committees that have members from both the House and the Senate, and they get together to debate a specific issue. So right now there's a joint committee that is discussing the budget and what to do about the debt, and they have to figure out how to cut the budget, or else certain rules are going to go into effect that will automatically cut the budget, and they don't want that to happen. So that's a very important committee. And then when it comes to being on these committees, basically what you need to do is, the longer you have been in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, the better committee you get to be on. So a more powerful committee like the House Rules Committee, the people that are on that committee are people that have been in the House of Representatives the longest. An important committee, again, as I mentioned before, is the Budget Committee. So people that are in the Senate or the House of Representatives that have been there for a while, they'll want to be on the Budget Committee because that's very important. And so the longer they've been there, the more important the committee they can attend. Now, when it comes to the legislative process, there are two really important things that only happen in the Senate, because the Senate has a little more leeway as far as its debate process goes, because there are only 100 people. And so with 100 people, it's a little bit easier to have a more open debate. And so one of the coolest things that you can do in the Senate, and this is just a great word as well, in my opinion, the coolest word that we'll talk about in civics and economics, and this is called a filibuster. Now, a filibuster happens in the Senate because in the House of Representatives this would never work, because it would just take way, way, way too long. And it would never get accomplished. Nothing would ever get done if you had filibusters in the House of Representatives. Filibuster is a process where the minority party can delay the vote on a bill. And the reason they would want to do this is because if they can delay the vote on a bill, then they can basically keep a bill from moving through. And in order to create a filibuster, you just have to keep talking, because once you are recognized as being able to speak on the Senate floor, as long as you keep talking, nobody can interrupt you. And so you can just keep talking and talking and talking and talking for hours and hours and hours to hold up the debate on a bill, or hold up the vote on a bill. Now, anymore, the filibuster does not necessarily follow this protocol. Really, the minority party only has to threaten a filibuster. And if they threaten that filibuster, then what happens is the majority party has to vote for what's called cloture. And cloture is a process to end a filibuster. So if the senators of the majority party can vote for cloture, which means they have to have 3/5 of the senators vote to limit the debate, so basically they set a time limit for debate, that eliminates the possibility for a filibuster and establishes the time when everybody can vote. And so if the majority party can do that, then that can block the filibuster. And so anymore, in the Senate, because almost every time there's a bill that is being that wants to be passed by the majority party, the minority party threatens a filibuster, then instead they just go ahead and determine that they have to have more than a majority vote in order to pass a bill. They suggest they have to have what's called a super majority in order to pass any bills, which is a 2/3 vote. So instead of the 51%, they have to have a 66% vote in order to pass a law, because that will override a filibuster, create a cloture, and will allow them to pass the bill. So the filibuster, while it's an interesting concept, and in a bygone day, senators would stand up on the Senate floor and literally read from a cookbook or the telephone book or the Bible, or whatever was the longest book they could find, and just bring it up and read from it on the Senate floor. That really doesn't happen anymore. They just basically threaten the filibuster, and that shuts down debate on a bill if they can't pass it with a 2/3 majority. Now, when it comes to changing the Constitution, we've talked about that a little bit, and this is a very difficult process. It takes a lot of people to determine that you can change the Constitution. So in order to even just have a constitutional amendment proposed, you have to have a 2/3 vote of both the House and the Senate. They both have to approve the amendment. Now, once that proposal happens, then they have to send that proposed amendment to all of the states, and all the state legislatures have to look at it, and they have to ratify it by an approval of 3/4 of the states. So 3/4 of the states have to approve the amendment in order for it to become part of the Constitution. So obviously, changing the Constitution is not something that the Founding Fathers decided we should take lightly, and so they made this process pretty difficult, but certainly not impossible. Now, the real meat and potatoes of the House of Representatives and the Senate, or of the Congress, is taking a bill or an idea and turning it into a law. Now, this is really probably their most important job. And so what we're going to do is really look at that in depth in class, and so you'll get that explanation when you come to class. So, see you then. Thanks.